Tonight in Democracy 20, celebrating full integration into global and regional environmental bodies after years of apartheid isolation.
We are in a far better place than we've ever been in our history when it comes to environmental legislation.
And looking back in history on this day, a controversial report that gave the green light to gambling of various forms in South Africa was released. Well, good evening and welcome to another edition of Democracy 20, a program in which we look back at the accomplishments of the country in the past 20 years of democracy in the country. Now, in tonight's show, we look at all things environment. Please do take part in the discussions as usual. You can do that by emailing us your views, this to elections@sabc.co.za, or if you prefer, you can send us an SMS text to 33726. Remember to begin your message though with the word vote, and each SMS will cost you R1.50. For tweets, use the hashtag SABC elections, and for those who like, you can go to our Facebook page. You can find us on SABC News online. Send us your comments, send us your views. We'd like to hear from you. We'll obviously try and use them as well as the show progresses to interact with our guests. And tonight we're speaking environment. I'll get immediately to the first story of the evening. Now, 20 years of democracy has seen the South Africa become fully integrated into global and regional environmental bodies after years of isolation under the apartheid regime. This has allowed environmental governance to progress substantially. The country has witnessed the formation of environmental principles, legislation and policy development, as well as strong international engagement. The White Paper on Environmental Management of 1998 sets out a comprehensive policy framework for integrated environmental management.
South Africa boasts a renowned natural heritage with its expansive landscapes, flora and fauna. Awareness around environmental issues is at an all-time high in the country. Despite world-class legislation, a number of challenges still remain.
We are in a far better place than we've ever been in our history when it comes to environmental legislation. We are on a number of global bodies. We are leaders in certain fields. We have excellent environmental impact legislation. We have very good legislation around specific issues.
Despite considerable legislation in the past 20 years, South Africa's rhino population is again on the brink of extinction, as it was in the early 1960s. A drive to conserve the species saw these numbers rise, but the success of the conservation effort resulted in South Africa being targeted by international rhino poaching syndicates, an ongoing fight South Africa seems to be losing. Another environmental issue taking centre stage in post-apartheid South Africa is fracking in the Karoo. The Eastern Cape government has set the wheels in motion in preparing for extensive exploration and production of shale gas. It has embarked on a 16 million rand research project with the Nelson Mandela University to determine the socio-economic implications of shale gas in the province. The Karoo is one of the few major basins in the world where the natural baseline is still intact. Estimates suggest that the recoverable gas in the Karoo ranges between 20 and 485 trillion cubic feet, with the potential revenue running into trillions of rands.
We believe that the people of this area should have some kind of a stake in this whole fracking thing, because these are our resources. The gas that we are talking about is a resource of the Karoo. Therefore, the people that should benefit the most out of it are the people of the Karoo.
We believe that we could take advantage of the energy transition by improving our skills base in the province, but also our research capability, and so that we build a knowledge base that's useful for driving industrialization program in the province.
When assessing the environment today, the importance of the relationship between the environment and communities relying on it for their existence cannot be overlooked. The N2 Tar Road in former Transkei was given the green light by the Department of Environmental Affairs in 2011. The project has seen opposition from environmental groups that claim it will permanently damage the Wild Coast's sensitive ecological system. Similar sentiments have been voiced regarding the proposed Kolobeni mining issue in the same area. Many feel that mining in the area will lead to environmental and social harm.
Opposition is justified in that what often happens is that we have a situation there where that particular resource can be found in many other areas that are less sensitive environmentally. The extraction of those minerals, should that go ahead, there are huge issues around how you actually get the stuff out, the road and sea networks that you would use.
Other arguments against the proposed mining include forced eviction from ancestral lands, loss of current tourism and potential ecotourism opportunities, as well as the loss of access to farmland for, amongst others, crops and livestock. Janine Lee, SABC News, Port Elizabeth.
And we now welcome Andrew Muir to tonight's program live from our Port Elizabeth studios. Good evening and welcome, Andrew. And well, thank you very much for joining us. As you've seen in that insert, you have the opinion that over the past 20 years, our environmental legislation has improved quite immensely.
Yes, absolutely. Good to hear you. I think we have made giant strides, and one has to take that in the context of what's happened internationally. And if you do that, South Africa has advanced in many ways across many sectors of the environment. At the same time, we do have very big challenges, but they're not isolated to us. They also are global environmental challenges that we face as a community.
Now, I mean, you look at things like you're saying, there are challenges. You know, despite the legislation we have, we're struggling with certain things like poaching. You know, that kills, you know, rhinos. I think over 100 have been killed since the year began. You got things like fracking that people are always fighting about, especially in that peninsula area. We still got challenges, many of them, and they're tough to overcome.
Yes, I mean, I think that our environmental legislation is sound. Often the implementation and the policing thereof is where the challenge comes in, and that's mainly because of a resource issue. I don't think that's intent. I think it's resources that need to be properly allocated to enforce and police the very good suite of legislation that we have. But we do have massive challenges, and I think the latest rhino poaching issue illustrates to the world the nature of these global criminal syndicates that are impacting directly on our environmental sustainability.
Mm-hmm. Now, look, you know, obviously there's the good and the bad. Looking back since '94, what have been the good that we've done, and where can we improve as far as the bad in this regard?
Well, there's been a lot of good. At one level, the public participation process, the legislation that enables communities and other stakeholders to be properly engaged is good, and it's basically working. Also, we have added considerably to our protected area estate. I think we've added about 1.5 million hectares of land to our protected area estate over the last 20 years. I'm not too sure of too many other countries in the world that have achieved that. The bad, well, yes, it's really around the policing and the enforcement of legislation. So poaching and wildlife crime in general has become a massive issue across our country. Whilst we all know about the rhino, it is unfortunately not limited to rhino. Rhino are just an indicator, I think, of a much bigger problem that we have as a country and even a continent have. And then, of course, the high levels of resource extraction or is at an unprecedented level. And I do not believe across Africa and particularly our country we're at sustainable levels at all. So this is a cause for huge concern.
Now, we've got about 2.5 minutes to go for this interview. The one other thing that I'd like to ask you for is it public, are we educated enough as probably as the public to enjoy and really understand what it is to keep our environment safe, to keep what we own, you know, which is there for us for the future generations? Are we educated enough, or maybe that's a drive that we could undertake as well, because an educated nation makes better decisions as far as that's concerned?
Absolutely, Tabiso, and I think that, again, one has to look at from where we have come from. And there is no doubt that the level of education and awareness is at a much higher level than it perhaps has ever been in our history when it comes to the environment. However, we still have a long way to go, and it's truly integrating that and understanding that as a holistic approach to all education. We need to make sure that no matter what we are teaching at our schools and in our classrooms, we integrate environmental thinking and environmental thought into almost every subject, because that's the wonderful thing about the environment. It is quite simple to integrate it into all teaching. It concerns every aspect of society. And then, of course, there's the experiential side. That's the side that worries me the most, what we used to call environmental education or outdoor-based education.
Yeah.
That kind of education is how you forge and you get an understanding of environmentalism and how you create ambassadors for the future. That education, that kind of outdoor education, needs a lot more urgent attention.
Andrew Meyer, what we'll do, we'll take a quick break before you go. In fact, we'll continue this discussion after the break, so please do stay with us. I just want to take a couple of interactions from our people at home. Thank you very much for sending us your SMS and tweets via Facebook messages. Let's now take a quick look at some of those before we go to the break. This one coming from Dave, I think it's Goundon. He says, well, Tabiso Sitole, hashtag SABC elections, where we've asked you to send them. More needs to be done for rhino conservation. Save the rhino. Fracking was sold to the highest bidder as far as David is concerned. This one comes from Christine. She says, as with all excellently drafted legislation, implementation of such is always fundamentally key. Hashtag SABC elections. Do send us your messages, and remember, you can hashtag us SABC elections, as you can see on our video wall here behind us. Also send us via Facebook. We'll try and use your tweets and your messages as far as is concerned with our guest. Democracy20 takes a quick break. Don't go away. More stories for you after this.
When a man's an empty kettle, he should be on his mettle, and yet I'm torn apart. Just because I'm presuming that I could be kinda human if I only had a heart. I'd be friends with the sparrows and the boy who shoots the arrows if I only had a heart.
Zoom into Africa. This is Burkina Faso. The president is Mr. Blaise Compaoré. Burkina Faso got independent from France on 5th August 1960. The population is more than 17 million people. One of Burkina Faso's major languages spoken is French. Monetary unit is CFA.
Welcome back. You're still watching Democracy20. Tonight, our guest is Wilderness Foundation Executive Director Andrew Meyer, and he has been speaking to us from our Port Elizabeth offices or studios. Andrew, let's get back straight into it. Recently, legally acquired rhino horns were stolen from the Nelspruit offices of the Mpumalanga Tourism Parks Agency. It's tough. You know, it's kind of a sad note, sad pill to swallow, especially considering that it just opens the market again for illegal poaching.
Yes, and I think that we really have to pay attention when our own departments and conservation agencies that are the custodians, really, largely for our rhino, where horn, a dry horn, as we call it, can get stolen from safe custody. One has to ask the question, what is going on? Because surely we've got the controls and the internal mechanisms in place. And without prejudging that, one has to ask if there was inside knowledge there. Why is that happening? It should not be happening in this time in our country.
In fact, it also poses the question, you know, the relationship between the environmental bodies as well as government itself.
Yes, and you know, we are trying very hard as a country, as environmental organizations, as NGOs, and civil society as a whole. They have really come together largely, very, very, very in a coordinated way around this rhino issue. Despite what is going on, we are working well across all branches. So I think that what South Africans have to recognize is that we are now the custodian, largely, of the rhino that are left in the wild in the world, and therefore that responsibility to protect these animals falls on us as a country as a whole, and not just individuals.
Now let's come back to probably some good news. Recently, 5 large retailers announced their financial support of the South African national parks to fight rhino poaching. What kind of role have the benefactors like these played since 1994?
Huge, because as we know in our country, we have a number of priorities across many sectors, and environment needs resource, it needs support, particularly environmental conservation and particularly the protection side of conservation. We have to rely not only on the government, but we have to rely on the private sector, on individuals, on foundations to support the work that we are doing in conservation. It has been another area where South Africa has done extremely well.
Now we're looking forward. How can the role of ecotourism play, you know, be improved rather upon, and what role would government play in all of this?
Well, I think we must just bear in mind as an African continent that we equally face a crisis with our free roaming wild lion populations and with elephant as well. Arguably 40,000 elephant were poached across Africa last year. So 3 of the big 5 are under extreme threat. And that underpins ecotourism. Nature-based tourism is largely argued against our big 5. And so yes, tourism is indeed an industry that is equally paying a lot of attention to the crisis we have with poaching. Poaching is something that we need to solve as a society as a whole.
Andrew Meyer, thank you very much for taking the time off to speak to us right here on Democracy20. Andrew Meyer is the Executive Director of the Wilderness Foundation and was speaking to us from our Port Elizabeth studios about this quite interesting topic indeed. As usual, we did ask you to send us your tweets or your anything, messages rather. We've got a couple more before we take a quick break. John S. Jackson says, well, hashtag SABC elections, that's how you send it. The flora and fauna and ecosystems belong to all the world. We're entrusted to care and protect them. Sending us via, I think it's Twitter there. Kulani Ngwegazi is saying, communities must be taught to preserve indigenous trees, plants, etc., etc. Hashtag SABC elections. As far as that's concerned, I think we've got one more before you go to break. No, in fact, no, that was the last one. We'll be back after this. Democracy20 continues. The favorite part of the segment for me, looking back in history on this day. Stay tuned.
SABC, sharing 20 years of inspiration.
Mercedes-Benz is all what you can expect from a lifestyle brand itself. We are about premium and luxury, we're about fascination, perfection, at the same time responsibility to our communities.
You know, my father was a musician and he loved music, he loved especially choral music.
Now as a person of color, you can't hit on her like, hello, nice.
Man, they were a great audience. No, I had so much fun performing for them.
Baby, I love.
That's Kaleidoscope, Sundays, 5:30 p.m. on SABC News.
The estimated overall prevalence of HIV increased from 10.6% of the population in 2008 to 12.2% in 2012.
We want to issue a new type of a condom that is colored and flavored to bring new excitement, and we think it will rejuvenate condom use among young people.
Multiple sexual partnerships are just skyrocketing. It's a very serious concern. Young women are actually having sex with older people. That's increasing.
That's AM News, daily at 10 a.m. on SABC News.
Welcome back. You're watching Democracy 20. Time now for our popular slot in which we look back into history on this day. Now, 21 years ago, the controversial Howard Commission's report on the legislation of gambling in South Africa was released. SABC News broadcast this report on the 22nd of April, 1993.
The Commission found there was massive demand for what it called casino gaming in South Africa. It recommended granting a total of 10 licenses, initially in the following tourist areas: the Western Cape, possibly 2, Plettenberg Bay, Jeffreys Bay area, the Natal Coast north of Durban, the Drakensberg, one possibly near the Vaal Dam, another east of Johannesburg, and the northern and eastern Transvaal. All the sites must be an hour's drive from big cities. Other recommendations: a single national lottery run by a national lottery board with proceeds going to social welfare. This will see the phasing out of scratch cards. Dog racing strictly controlled and licensed. Up to 4 slot machines permitted in clubs. A single national football pool, the funds going to sports development. A green light to bingo, but strictly regulated. And a yes to sports betting and office and club sweepstakes, but all subject to specific conditions. The Howard Commission also recommended a gaming control board and a range of levies and taxes for all major forms of gambling. It was a cautious Justice Minister Kobie Coetzee who faced parliamentary reporters. He couldn't say that government had accepted the recommendations, which would see the state tap and regulate an 8 billion rand industry. But clearly he saw interesting prospects for money to boost critical social upliftment program.
I would say that it actually introduces the possibility of supporting our tourist industry. I think this is the most important facet. Secondly, we do have a shortage on our budget for welfare and related issues. And in this sense, I wouldn't say it's exciting, but definitely it makes sense.
While the Democratic Party agrees with the minister that a state lottery will increase spending for social welfare projects, spokesman Tony Leon says the Commission's findings are a complete repudiation of the government's opposition to gambling. He said his party found it odd that the number of casinos should be restricted.
It says the number of casinos in South Africa should be restricted to about 10. In fact, there are more than 10 casinos in the TBVC countries, which are a fifth or a tenth the size of South Africa. And also the recommendation that there be an hour's drive away from the major metropolitan areas. We don't understand what the purpose of this is.
The gaming industry, which closed its doors on February the 1st when the Gambling Amendment Act came into effect, has also expressed its reservations.
The casinos appear to have to be linked to a tourist hotel. One, again, doesn't know what that means. And if one goes for an hour's drive from certain metropolitan areas, one won't get anywhere at all.
A spokesman for Rian International, the sole supplier of gaming equipment to Africa, has welcomed the report, while Games Africa, which runs scratch card competitions, says a state lottery would leave little room for private enterprise.
The recommendations, if implemented, would result in the company having to cease the business for which it was started.
Now it's wait and see for the industry which used to provide employment to 60,000 people.
Interesting there, looking at the haircut of the former DP leader, Tony Leon. I must say I enjoyed that one. But before we go, let's take a quick look. One more message. This one comes from Zanokolo Sibam saying policy provisions for integration of environmental studies in schooling is there. It's lacking on teacher development. That's speaking to our topic tonight about the environmental aspects as far as the 20 year of democracy is concerned and what we've enjoyed over the past 20 years. That's a wrap for tonight's show. I'll be back tomorrow evening, same time, same place, right on SABC3, as well as SABC News Channel 404. The English news follows at 7 o'clock. Good night.